All right, I think we're going to get started. Folks can keep trickling in. Glad that everyone enjoyed their lunch, wants to take their time getting in. It's also good. But thanks for coming to the session. So today we're going to talk about kind of all things operation and maintenance, O&M. Hopefully that is the session that you thought you were coming to. We tried to make it really obvious for you. So I also want to say hi to the virtual audience that we have online with us. If folks have joined there, hopefully you get something from the session as well. So today we've got great collaborators. My name's Gracie Hornsby. I'm a PhD candidate at Stanford. We also have Chris from Splash. And then we have Anvish from SHRI and also kind of repping Boston University. You're foot in both camps. Yeah. And used to be in the Stanford camp, but he made his escape a couple years ago. So today, this is what we've outlined as our goal of the session. So collaborative side event, hence you see the circles in the chairs. We're gonna hopefully not have you sitting still in rows of chairs for too long. To discuss evidence-informed design principles, troubleshoot pressing O&M challenges, and build your network of colleagues thinking about O&M. So, and we're very serious about each of these. So in terms of evidence-informed design principles, we feel each of our organizations bring some experience for what is working, what is not working, but also more broadly, the principles behind what is working and what is not working, and hopefully ways that we can generalize that to the context that you all are working in. We want to take time to troubleshoot issues. O&M is not a static system that you design once and it works perfectly forever. This is something that you have to keep considering and building and iterating over time to strengthen the system. Sometimes that means that there are going to be challenges, or there's almost guaranteed to be challenges that you need to work through. And hopefully you'll have a lot of time to talk with the colleagues today, hear from other people's experiences as well. So like I just said, O&M systems evolve over time. I'm going to introduce just a couple of principles to kind of frame our session. This is a very loose framework that we're going to work through today in terms of this kind of time-dependent evolution of O&M systems. When we think about proving, we think that a lot of O&M systems start from a place of you need to convince somebody of the value add of operation and maintenance. The way that we have often gone about development is we build it, and then whoever receives that piece of infrastructure may be responsible for the operation and maintenance. And I think we know for a variety of reasons that that has not been working particularly well. And it means that we don't get as much out of those investments if the infrastructure goes into disrepair quickly. But then we have this process of scaling as well. Once you have this initial system that you feel like is working in your context, you're gaining some momentum, and you might want to scale to more schools, more public facilities, more households, whatever environment you're working in. And again, sort of stress testing that system to see if it is scalable, if what you've built can be scaled up. And then at least for our three organizations, we also think about eventually passing these over. Kind of like was talked about in the plenary today, we don't necessarily see funding, operation, and maintenance in perpetuity as the role of NGOs. This is something that ideally we'd be able to pass over to a partnership with government, and that, or that, you know, an outside influx is not the permanent system for operation and maintenance. Another kind of, I guess, principle, or almost setting the boundary for today's session, is that all of us work in the setting outside of the household. There are surely design principles of operation and maintenance that overlap with household operation and maintenance as well. It's just not really where we bring our experience from today. So SHRI works primarily in community settings and public toilets, and then Splash and Stanford more from like the research side, but in partnership with World Vision, we've both done a lot of work in schools. So we bring a little bit less experience from the healthcare facility side, but also every event I'm ever in with Washington healthcare facilities folks, there's always like a lot of overlap with Washington schools as well. So if anybody in the room represents that, I think you'll bring a lot of relevant experience as well. But a couple reasons why we're excited about WASH outside of the household is that these are often higher traffic systems. So we feel like there's a lot of great potential for impact here, but it also brings harder operation and maintenance issues when you don't have a single family using a facility, but you have a lot of high traffic in public spaces or in schools. With that, we have an opportunity to reach some underserved populations, whether that's in community spaces or schools or healthcare facilities. We're maybe reaching a different demographic than we would with household investments. And then by n greater than 1, I just mean that we're not necessarily looking at guidance to be given to a single household, but we might be looking more broadly at how do we create a system of operation and maintenance that is not just applicable to this one school, but a whole school system. Not just applicable to one public toilet, but an entire city of public toilets. So again, it's this kind of issue of scale. And then the very last thing that I will talk to you about from up here before we get a little bit more interactive is that we broadly have worked off of this central framework. This is from Pu et al. 2022. You can always email Christine Pu if you'd like this article as well. She'll be happy to give it to you. But we would say that these are 3 necessary and sufficient conditions for sustainable service delivery. So broadly, when we talk about resources, we're thinking human, financial, physical, or natural assets. We know some of those are necessary for good operation and maintenance, but the other 2 bubbles are more often neglected. So we also think about information. What kind of timely and credible information do we need to inform decision making? That last clause is very intentional. It's not just data that we collect to sit in a repository somewhere. It's data collected for decision making. We have to do something with that data. And then lastly, we also think about accountability, which we define as mechanisms that align incentives and authority among relevant actors. So how do we think about working within the existing system of incentives as well to create a system that makes it stronger, not, again, creating this kind of parallel system. Okay, so now the agenda is going to be, we're going to go into 3 breakout groups, which I do think we have enough folks to fill out 3, but we can always pivot if we need to do fewer breakout groups. So in a moment, you'll hear 90-second lightning talks from each of us about kind of where our organization is coming from, our experience with O&M. And then we'll spend the rest of the session in the breakout groups. And the goal is for you to have space to bring your O&M challenges, your O&M issues, your questions, both to us, but mostly to a circle of colleagues who are in a sort of similar stage of developing their operation and maintenance systems. Yeah, have this time to troubleshoot with colleagues. So we encourage you to pick the breakout group first that is most aligned with kind of where you're at, and we're going to go through this kind of like proving, scaling, passing over framework. Each of us kind of represent one of those. So we encourage you to pick that one first. You'll get to spend the most time there, and then you'll also get to visit the other 2 groups as well, meet different colleagues, mix with everybody in the room. And then unfortunately the order of the lightning talks is that you have to keep listening to me because Stanford is in the proving stage. So I get to go first and stay up here for 1 more second. And I need just a couple notes. Yeah, so Stanford designed and tested an O&M model for public primary schools in Uttar Pradesh, India. And we'd say that this model is, again, this early stage of kind of proving what O&M can do for schools in this area. One of the main operational issues that we identified was finding a person who was willing to clean public toilets, both for issues of social taboo, personal feelings of uncleanliness, and lack of pay in a lot of circumstances. So we focused more on this kind of operation side of the operation and maintenance. To deliver those services, we contracted with a private third-party agency who hired and managed part-time cleaners. So we did this kind of professionalized service model with a third-party agency. So we had scale in mind for this, we just have not scaled yet. And that was in our initial design. So kind of the 2 things I'd like to highlight that we might talk more about in this group is that we aim to understand the existing incentives in the UP school system and design an O&M intervention that was compatible with those incentives. Happy to chat more about what that looked like in UP. And the second is that we aimed to build political interest via our outcomes. This was also a randomized controlled trial, so we were doing more measurement than you would ordinarily do for monitoring. But we wanted to use those outcomes in this proving stage to build interest with the local government to see if this is something that they would partner with us on in the future. So if any of that interests you, or especially if you're at this kind of early stage of defining your O&M system, I will be over there in the back, and come join me. And now it's up to SHRI.
Hi everyone, my name is Anvesh and I work with Sanitation and Health Rights in India, or SHRI. And so the government in India has heavily invested in infrastructure of shared sanitation facilities because they understand the importance of those facilities for marginalized communities. The problem, however, as I'm sure all of you are aware because that's why you're in this session, is a lack of similar investments in the continued operations and monitoring and maintenance of these community toilets or public toilets, which basically means that it's not uncommon for you to go around communities to see random cement structures that are completely underutilized and broken down. And that presents a huge gap, especially as I mentioned in marginalized communities, because they don't have alternatives of using household toilets. And that's where SHRI as an organization steps in. We partner with local governments, district governments, state governments who actually help us fund the renovation of these facilities while SHRI takes over the day-to-day operations and maintenance and monitoring of these facilities. So we do this by hiring and training staff members who are local to the communities that we serve in. And SHRI also uses a digitalized monitoring dashboard. I'm happy to share the website with you. You can see all the data. And we track daily facility use and daily issues so that breakdown periods are essentially minimized. In 2024, we were able to cater to about 2.5 million people across 2 states in India, in Jharkhand and Bihar. And we're slowly hoping to expand into other districts in Jharkhand and also enter the wash and school space. Over time, as we scale, we actually want to be able to support our government partners to be able to pick up the operations and monitoring for their own facilities, while SHRI can act as the monitoring and wash training partner for governments as we go on scaling. So if you're interested in O&M from a community public toilet space, from an aspect of scaling up your O&M models, yeah, I'll pick one of those group discussions.
Hi everybody, my lightning talk starts now. So at Splash, we seek to change 100% of government-funded schools in the cities that we work in, which ultimately gives us a unique opportunity, but also a big responsibility. By working at that scale, it attracts political interest, potentially political capital and co-investment, but it also means that when things go awry, or things aren't working, or taps stop flowing, it's a massive problem across hundreds of schools. So at Splash, we have a unique portfolio of O&M experiences, one of which it comes to us from Addis Ababa, where we are working to hand off a policy and a strategy to the entire city to adopt a cluster, kind of a circuit rider model with embedded staff in the Bureau of Education to provide preventative maintenance to schools. So that's a centralized policy level solution that we are advocating for and working with the government to hand off after working in 100% of schools in Addis. But if we take a comparison to that in Kolkata, the central governments that we were partnering with were not as interested at all in adopting a citywide O&M solution, so we had to take a decentralized approach. And we developed these annual maintenance contracts with our long-term implementing partner that 100% of schools now have invested their own capital in, their own budgets. So we have about 190 schools on these annual maintenance contracts. So if you come to our session, we're going to talk about how do you hand things off, how do you pass things over at scale, and recognizing that it's some hybrid of centralized, decentralized, bringing in utilities, and the challenges of ultimately exiting with something that is financed, scalable, viable, feasible for the actors that exist. And I guess the last little plug there is, I think at Splash we've learned it's really hard to change a system, but kind of like a judo master, how do you leverage the strengths of the system to ultimately result in citywide O&M solutions. So that's what we're gonna talk about here.
Okay, I'll take
Yeah,
that.
cool. Okay.
Now you have to pick your favorite one of us. We're not your children, you're allowed to pick favorites. So as a reminder, Stanford back there, kind of early stage, proving, what does it look like to develop O&M to start? SHRI, where are you? Are you the other one? Other one in the back, SHRI, and then Splash up here, and we'll give you a few minutes to transition, pick a group, and we'll call time when it's 25 minutes after, when you get the privilege of switching groups, not that we're forcing you to switch groups.
And you will be able to chat with all of us.
Yes.
So you can have your like second favorite child.
Yeah, you'll get your second favorite and your least favorite as well.
We're gonna chat.
Also, we're trying to sign up people so that we can stay in touch and also share our findings from today's discussion. So please do sign up if you haven't.
So great job, on time to the minute, you're at 1:59.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you, because as we progress through this, if you're taking notes, writing down tidbits, things that you're wrestling with, to actually keep them on sticky notes, because at the end, we're gonna collectively come together and look at the different things that we have across the board. So, and then you have your notebooks, which can go with you wherever you want to go. We're gonna ask you to take some notes.
Are you trying to give all of them away, or?
Yeah. And I have markers too. Good, okay. Actually, can I break that pad in half? Okay, so well, thanks for choosing me. I'm glad that I could sell the pitch well enough to attract some people. So, Luke.
I'm good. I'm not an opera, I'm just an observer, right?
Yeah. But you're like a later commenter, and it's better that you just participate in the conversation.
Like the cranky Muppet in the balcony?
The crank, yeah.
The cranky Muppet in the balcony, I've always liked that role.
Their names are Statler and Waldorf.
Statler and Waldorf, thank you. They sound like good fools.
So to start, what we thought was just to give a little bit more of kind of the story. I gave you 90 seconds, but I'll share a couple more minutes about what Splash's experience is. But then we very much want to make this about what you're wrestling with and what ideas you have. But I'll just share a little bit more about Splash. So Splash, we basically bring in philanthropic dollars, often pretty significant philanthropic dollars, and work in close partnership with city and national governments to try to address 100% of government-funded schools in the city. So I gave the two examples of Addis Ababa and Kolkata. And in the case of Addis Ababa, we brought in about $35 million of funding, of which the government, the Bureau of Education in Addis Ababa, was required to co-invest. They co-invested about $15 million over the last 6 to 7 years. And in fact, as of this morning, they just committed another $1.3 million towards sanitation. So that's a pretty significant amount. So by bringing in significant capital, it does demand and attract the attention of governments in a way that is an opportunity but also a responsibility as a city. So as we progress through working both by introducing infrastructure but also behavior change at 100% of schools in Addis, we ultimately, probably too late in the process, really wanted to start developing a citywide O&M solution that would work after we exited, because we fully intend to exit this eventually. And we are learning from Addis, we started that too late, to be frank. So we are now in the process of trying to advocate for the adoption of a citywide O&M model that is based on a randomized control trial we did, testing different ways of doing O&M. And we developed a whole policy with our Bureau of Education colleagues.
Can I ask a?
Yeah, please.
So the investment, the 35 million that went in, that was infrastructure building up that actual water and sanitation?
Yeah, it was a combination of both infrastructure, some CapEx, but then also the behavior change program and elements as well.
Okay, so all of it except the O&M.
Well, there was O&M money in there, but it was kind of during the period of the project. And now we're kind of in the last year of the project, but we want to ensure there's some model in place so that ultimately the 400 schools worth of infrastructure doesn't deteriorate. Yeah, so we did in the last couple of years, we tested 3 different O&M models side by side, and that ultimately underpinned a policy recommendation that we went to the Bureau of Education with, and we built a whole costed model aligned with their budget and their budget lines. They are interested, they're continuing to refine that and find the money for that. But we continue to come up with challenges about the human resources side. Hiring more people within the government system is a challenge. And in Ethiopia, they insist on this being kind of a government-led way, or BOE, Bureau of Education-led O&M. It's kind of like introducing the problem that they're struggling to solve. So I'm happy to talk more about the details there, but it is an interesting comparison to Calcutta, where when it started project-wise, which was supposed to be citywide, 600 schools initially was the vision. The city government of Calcutta ultimately didn't bring that co-investment like they said they would, and so we had to make the difficult decision to stop expanding here. And so we are in 190 schools roughly, but we didn't want to just hightail it out of there and leave those 190 schools high and dry. So over the course of the wind down of the project, we worked with a local nonprofit who launched like a private water technician, water plumbing, washing schools plumbing business to develop these annual maintenance contracts, and started working with every school to buy into those maintenance contracts. That now funds an entire washing school's like technical unit. They're able to provide preventative maintenance to all 190 schools that have invested in it, and the schools pay for that out of their like school level O&M budget. So it's not like a citywide BOE budget that's paying for it. It's the school operations and maintenance budgets that are paying for the like $48 a year annual maintenance contract.
And that's from people paying fees, students paying. No, this is a public
it's
school.
It's from the school budget that is directed by the.
Line item from education. Okay.
Yep. So we kind of have these two models that are decentralized in nature but require a lot of school level engagement to adopt and invest in, or a centralized model with a lot more concerted effort centrally at the Bureau of Education and that is. And then as we move into new countries, which we are actively in Zambia, Tanzania, how do we bring this thinking along with uptimes thinking and results-based financing, which they are certainly the experts in, to kind of bring together both utility strengthening, results-based payments, and central utility, or central engagement with financing. So, all of that is
Can we take bets on which one's going to last longer?
Let's first bet which one exists.
Well, no, I mean, it's just ironic that I would place a much larger bet on the Indian model than the Ethiopian model, because I like incentives and people getting paid to do stuff, and a separation of where the money is and where the service delivery is, and that just sounds so much more sustainable and likely to deliver than governments and incentives. And that's hard. And it's, the government insists that it has to be done by the ministry in Addis. It has to be done by the government, huh?
they view the obligation and the responsibility of like Washington schools infrastructure O&M as a BOE responsibility.
Is there any discussion of contracting, like the BOE contracting a service provider to do this?
Great.
Kind of like a bigger version of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so great question. We have broached that, but not necessarily at the like city level or sub-city level or board level, but more so what we tested and have spoken with them about is like, can the schools themselves contract like private contractors to solve or provide preventive maintenance or solve other issues? And A, there's a capacity constraint. B, schools can't pay as much as just like the general private sector can pay for other things. Minimal. But the answer is in Ethiopia, kind of uniquely now, that like almost would be, well, maybe a non-starter, just given the nature of the government and how they function. Yeah. But it's one of the models we tested was when schools can hire their own private technicians. How does that compare to a preventative wash technician versus partnering with these technical vocations?
What'd you find out?
The least expensive was on-staff preventative maintenance technician, so like a kind of entry-level technician that rotated among schools. That resulted in the lowest amount of downtime, least cost, best efficiency, most timely responsiveness. However, it does rely on like the central management of like wash technicians among a group of schools. And like BOE is very interested in that, but again, it comes down to like, can they add more resources to their budgets? And that's a hard sell, and made more difficult in the last 7 to 9 months.
And when you say O&M, you're referring to like repairs as well as, because there was another one talking about cleaning. So is this all of those things, or is it one of them?
It's preventative maintenance, but not necessarily cleaning. In our experience, which is not necessarily the right experience, but the school staff are responsible for cleaning and like that part of O&M, like the cleaning and janitorial services, are the responsibility of the school. So we have a whole on-site O&M strategy and program about largely janitorial services and simple like preventative stuff. But more complicated repairs and issues, and like more preventative issues of maintenance around like filter replacements and water storage, sealing, maintaining the ground network, piping. Good question.
You kind of answered it, but that I would think a lot of 80% of kind of the preventive care could probably be done by a custodian who receives additional training.
Yes, yeah, so that is one theory, and like we've tested that. And what's interesting about that is like the natural place to look for that within the school staffing structure would be like a janitorial role, but the salary bands within that role are very, very small. So once they become like trained to provide like technical expertise in plumbing and wash systems, they stop working as a janitor at the school and go start their own business.
I love this when we talk about social change. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's like now that like wash technician.
So you created a public good, but a private bad.
It's like it is like because they like tap out on like they now can make a lot more money just like opening up their little plumbing. Yeah, but that was one. Another, we looked at that more qualitatively. We saw this was happening. Once skills went up in the form of like issues, fixing preventative maintenance, there was higher amounts of attrition.
Great success.
So I mean, I'm gonna, if it's okay, did you have a question?
I have a question.
Oh, please,
actually, yeah.
ask a question and I'm gonna ask you to share.
Well, it was about the comment you made about, like if you could go back in Ethiopia, I mean, this whole idea of like, adoption or like embedding within government systems, like if you could go back, you would maybe done things differently. So question about sort of like, you said that one of, if not the main incentive that the Board of Education and Alice had to work with you was that you were bringing substantial funding from the beginning, right, from the outset, right? And so that was like, okay, we're gonna be part of this, we're gonna co-invest or co-fund this. But then sort of the adoption at the end, or, you know, at some point is having a hard time. So I'm wondering if you could maybe, have you thought about, if you could go back and redo it, like how would you phase this out, or how would you sort of like, what stop gates would you put in place to make sure that when you get to the end, you're progressing at the same stage? You know?
I can answer you very specifically, but I think there's some generalities around that that is worth like the bigger group thinking about or wrestling with. So in Addis, we never had a commitment for OpEx budgeting over a longer time period than the project. It was only CapEx contributions in the form of sanitation construction. So the Addis Ababa BOE, Bureau of Education, with the construction industry, committed to their, like, that $15 million came in the form of building totals. And that was like their share of the project. Those totals were like to our collaborative design and to the specs that we designed. Once we rolled into Bahardar, which is another city in the north, we said by year 2 of the project, there was a CapEx financial contribution and there was a committed OpEx, which was, we aspired to a 10-year OpEx commitment. As we move into new places like Lusaka, we, from day one, first time we met the permanent secretary of education as well as the PS of water, we said there will be stopgaps for CapEx co-investment and there will be mandatory stopgaps for OpEx budgeting centrally. And so that the dollar amounts there are rough, like back of the envelope, but like can we secure a 3% per annum OpEx commitment for 10 years? Like 3% of the infrastructure value per year for 10 years. And by year 2 of 5, there's a committed MOU in place for that.
And has your funding been, like, because, so now you're like, we don't bring our funding unless the government commits, but then your funders are also wanting you to make progress, so how do you kind of handle that?
It's fun, I like keep looking over your shoulder to Lewis, because like we talk about these conversations all the time. So our funder is...
What, me worried?
So the answer is Lewis helps you.
We like...
I'm just gonna walk out the door now, so.
No, that was a great question. Our primary funder in phase 1 of Project Wise was SIF.
Yeah.
And they actually required, for them to disperse funds, we had to hit government co-investment thresholds. But they also required us to hit like output-based. And those sometimes were like direct conflict with each other. Like we couldn't get more funding because the government hasn't funded, but we needed to achieve more outputs. It was like we got stuck in a heartbeat. But I think our current funding for phase 2, which is another major backbone fund, does have very strict criteria of like how much the government needs to invest, but there's more flexibility of like when that comes in and how that is distributed across the different geographies and countries and cities. Yeah, but I will say, bridging to the plenary, being in Zambia, walking into the room with the Minister of Water, Minister of Education, and their PSs, and saying like, we have $15 million. That big sanitation USA project of $17 million is now gone. You have to bring 15%, which is $4 million over the next 5 years. And they like, pretty quickly they're like, okay, I think we can do that. Here's how we're gonna make it happen. And that's like a really different conversation than it was, I think, 5 years ago. So that's an interesting takeaway from.
Because the bilateral funding has gone away, or because you guys have a track record of of doing it, or both? Why is it a difference?
I'd say it's more the former, but we like can then like we can talk about our previous history, but I think it's more the former.
You mentioned Ministry of Water, the Ministry of Construction toilets. That's one of the things that we challenge with school health. And so we're always working with the Ministry of Education, but the maintenance typically has to be done through another ministry. And so that complicates who's supposed to do what is often not clear, the school doesn't know. And so that's, I don't know.
What country?
I work in several, but Mozambique, Malawi, Indonesia, I work in a couple. But that's usually the thing. When we're running like any projects, washes underinvested, and then they don't know who to go to. And so when you're thinking about O&M plans, how do you get the commitments?
Who else here is going to work in like Washington schools?
Okay, so maybe I can share experience basically between the conference. My point from what she has said. I come from Tanzania, and I know you have presence we are coming there.
We're trying.
We started conversation with my government. The only issues in washing school is the issue of complexity. Sometimes school is taking care of more than one ministry, and issue of O&M, sometimes it is responsibility of the school. At the same time, the school feels that they're supposed to get money from the through the capitation fees from the central government to support them with O&M. But at the same time, you have a free education policy that does not allow parents contributing anything to the school. If you teach them, you ask them to contribute, they say, okay, this is free government policy. So at the same time, the school teachers supposed to depend on capitation fund. And capitation fund come with the number of students that you have. The less a student, the less a fund. And the legend is very clear that among the funds that will be getting, they're supposed to take maybe this percent for O&M. But it has a conflicting priorities. Are you supposed to buy a jack or to buy a tap? Or maybe to do some operational costs. So that's make that we have a very good infrastructure through the payment for research program held by World Bank. So most of the school there, they have very good washing infrastructure. So sometimes they are not either using it because they are afraid of water bills. So you may have a good washing infrastructure, but if teachers are afraid to make students use it because of the operational cost. But again, they can use it, but when any system is broken, maybe the school does not have ability to repair on time. And the funds that come from the central government sometimes delays, not come on time. Or if it comes, it's small amounts, so you cannot distribute it to operational costs and also running other school programs. So that is the main issue. But again, the issue of overlapping of responsibilities is like no one owns it. Yes. We have very good policy. It is very clear indicated in the guideline that you are supposed to allocate this amount for O&M. But the real thing is how to implement it. So I know that you have that MOU with government. The issue is to make sure that now they know what they are signed to do, and that is the main issue that we are supposed to make sure that actually they can accept, because we need money. Being this, we can do this, but the real thing is, are we going to do it? How can we hold me accountable for not doing it in the IO government?
So I'm curious, Andrew, I'm going to tee you up I'm going to ask you a question. So Andrew, uptime, you're really cool, you should learn a lot about read a bunch of stuff. So my question is kind of bridging her point of like the timeliness of like government distributed funds that could be used for O&M, and sometimes that doesn't align. In the case of like uptime, like a more results-based contracting model, and maybe what as uptime is working towards is like, could you curb some of that volatility by timing the like results-based payments to the service providers like where if the government can disperse funds on a quarterly basis, you time your payments to your service providers to a quarterly basis, and it doesn't rely on funds getting to the school to then pay the service provider on an ad hoc weekly basis.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to do. There still is always the risk that the government won't pay, and then that's, you know, that's kind of a fundamental challenge to work through. But so we have two countries where we're doing this kind of model in Bangladesh and in Zambia, and this is for rural schools, healthcare facilities. So, and I think my understanding in Zambia, in the more urban context, schools have a budget line item and they pay a water bill, but in the rural context, the resources that rural schools have is not enough to pay the contractor directly for O&M. And so the model that we're working towards is the service provider has a contract with the government, so they're and it's an area-based contract, so within a well-defined area where they can work out their costs and recovering the costs, they get paid to deliver, so they maintain all the infrastructure, hand pumps or pipes, water systems, or rainwater harvesting systems, or whatever it is. They maintain that infrastructure and then they report performance, and then we validate and verify the performance, and then we tell the government how much to pay those service providers, and then they get paid. And for us, we've just been doing quarterly basis. That's mostly because more frequent than that becomes really problematic from just, you know, mechanisms, dispersing funds, and also verifying performance. It could be less frequent, but then you run into problems with the service provider not, you know, cash flow, because they're having to pre-fund stuff. In Bangladesh, it's co-funded now in the district, so it's 1,200 schools, some healthcare facilities, but mostly schools. And right now, it's 50% of the funding comes from the government and 50% comes from uptime. So we tell the government how much to disperse, and then they have to disperse, and then we disperse separately. So it's like, we say, we send them a memo, here's how much we're gonna pay, here's how much you need to pay. The contract says that we can make up to 2 quarters of payments until we stop making payments if the government doesn't pay. And the risk is totally on the service provider, right? And we've actually been getting this contract up and running. It took a year of them doing this, before we could even get the government lined up to do it, and the government wanted to do this. It just took, you know, a lot of time to get the mechanisms in place. And so we actually had to go find grant funding to kind of fund the government portion, for that year. But now the government's on the hook, and they have dedicated line item in their budget through 2030 for this. But, you know, I think, if anything, a general kind of thing is there's, like you're saying, government buy-in from the beginning, making sure you don't scale it too fast before you've got those mechanisms in place, because then the risk is all borne by the service providers. And then also, I think those are something
So that's an interesting model of incentives to government, because by telling them you're going to stop paying the co-payment, if they don't pay, you've given them an incentive to keep paying. And so I'm wondering, in the oddest case, do you have any lever? Is there any sort of incentive system or anything you could build in to? I understand that government is the low-cost service provider, and I mean the other problems. But have you figured out any sort of incentive mechanism that, in the long run, is, you know, I think in some cases we're looking at like committees of, you know, the school. Is there any incentive system that will get the government to keep doing the right thing in the long run?
I'd be interested to hear other people's experience with like what is the accountability mechanism. But in Addis there is like a school management committee, which is like an external body that like manages the school and how they budget. Like it's like a board that oversees the school.
For each school?
But their accountability like levers are weak, honestly. Like, and it's not consistent across what they could do with that power to oversight.
To interrupt the great conversation. conversation, but all of the folks who are so experienced in it, you like to lend your expertise to some of these other groups. You get a lot of questions.
I'm happy to chat with anybody.
Do you want
to be honest.
to move the?
Oh yeah, I'll
We can. We weren't sure if people wanted to mix
Oh,
and
okay,
match
I
and
don't
the others as well.
I'll take it.
I think you're right.
Or if you want me to stay here longer. But yeah, happy to chat more with everybody.
Tell us when you solve the problem.
So at the end, just to tee you up, at the end, we're going to kind of rally back together for about 10, 15 minutes and put your kind of takeaways, what you're wrestling with, and find kind of clusters that mean. And then we're going to synthesize that and share it out to anybody that wants to when considering an O&M model, here are the things to consider: human resources, aligning government. Like, we want to package this into like a sort of like a brief, a tactical brief for people to use. So, keep your ideas, or throw them. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Definitely be interested in chatting more about sort of contracting models at different scales.
You should talk to me and but also here's my card.
Thank you.
Where do you work?
Walray.
Locally or?
Yeah, I'm based in the US, but I'm part of the big
We're following the conversation, following the conversation. Reached out to him. I was somebody's on my list. A little bit of a long list, but then you put it at the top of the list.
Right now it's like 5%.
I would have been pretty popular if you're not.
Yeah, so there's creating.
So, I was talking about, this will be a little bit of a repeat. Did you guys enjoy your cars? Come on in.
I still don't know your model. Okay. So I just understand a bit more.
How are you? Okay, so I'll start off by sharing more about Slash. As I said in my pitch, Splash is in a unique position because we bring philanthropic funds to try to tackle entire cities. So 100% of government funded schools with comprehensive infrastructure as well as behavior communication. That ultimately means hundreds of schools, hundreds of thousands of students. But it also means that we attract the attention of government and crowded co-investment. Well, we have an opportunity to crowd co-investment in a way that smaller scale organizations can't, but also means that the problems are wicked hard to cover in whole cities. I provided a quick example of like a centralized policy strategy in Addis, and some of the challenges there, versus in Kolkata where we had to take a decentralized approach where schools had to invest in these annual maintenance contracts with service providers, or a service provider, but ultimately, we had to co-design that maintenance contract and then kind of convince or sell that annual maintenance contract to all the schools so that we could leave Kolkata feeling like there was some O&M solution there. Interestingly, the decentralized approach has a lot more traction. 100% of schools are co-invested. It's $48 a year. Schools can afford it. It's preventing maintenance and inventory of materials as needed.
Is it water or sanitation?
It's all of the clean water at the drinking stations, the hand washing station infrastructure, O&M, as well as some above ground sanitation, but does not get into septic or fecal septic. That's actually a separate contract that we're trying to work with. Yeah, and then as we move into new countries, so we're actively expanding into Lusaka, Kitwe, Ndola in Zambia, Malawi, Blantyre, Malawi, Dodoma, Mbeya, and Tonga in Tanzania. I think the big opportunity is to take like a hybrid approach. Utilities play a huge role in major cities. Government financing, if we could attract that, linking it to some results-based payment mechanisms, using hopefully learning from Uptime and working closer with you guys in the longer term, as well as recognizing kind of the different roles that the schools play in the government. So that's how I'll kick it off, but would love to hear sort of what questions or what things you're wrestling with as you think about O&M. And we can keep the conversation robust. I'm going to get questions.
I'm working, I'm working with the project management and we're about to start working in 245 schools, so we will inherit like related issues there. And there's a bunch. There's like once they have the wash infrastructure, they can't pay for the water. So like that's something. There's a lot of theft. These are the common things I've been hearing. We haven't yet started. We haven't yet started yet. And we have been. What we hope to do is start to do some more of like Central America. It's a school feeding project, so you have lots of different ministries involved and who should be playing a role, including their Ministry of Public Works. But because it's a multi-sector program, it's like everyone's been no one's at the same time, and so WASH is a big component of our project, and we have been trying to figure out how to monitor all the things, how to show the government what needs to be invested in at what time. Like, is it a matter of prioritization? Is it a matter of, accountability in that if they see it, then someone can do something? There's a lot of questions that we don't know the answer to, but like their school fund that you were talking about, the $48, I was told they could barely afford $75. So like that's a totally different, just also a lower budget. But anyway, those are all the problems that are off the top of my head. Let's see what really.
You've earlier, she was in my group last time. She's a double rounder.
Double.
But you talked about just the challenges of like cross-ministerial coordination. I think that's certainly true in a lot of areas, but Washington schools is unique.
Well, it's like you see it in the policy, right? It's very clear, like this person's going to do that, but that's not how it happens on the ground, right?
My esteemed Aquia folks, I'm just curious. I actually has Aquia done any research or like in the O&M space for school, like for okay, household water point work?
Yeah. We've done water testing at school, but not really, I guess, on the water testing side.
Yeah.
In partnership with.
So this actually isn't part of the study, but.
Okay. So the two threads I'm thinking of, I'm trying to like connect, which you guys would be great people to help me connect them, is the role of subsidy and the role of O&M, and then like how it links to like a results-based contracting. Because like aligning money with the, and incentivizing the actors is like one of the big challenges that you guys are going up here.
And what Lewis brought up, which is pretty interesting, is not just incentivizing the service provider to provide the service, but also trying, and it's not the government needs to be incentivized, they know that these are problems, but it's, they have so many conflicting priorities when they're trying to find line items in the budget to do these kind of things. And if you're coming with some funding and they're saying, I mean, that's one thing is just coming with the funding, but then also guaranteeing that if there's a recurring commitment from the government to pay out of a line item in the budget, how do you like structure the contract or the payout so that that payout actually comes, right? Is an interesting thing that Lewis is kind of trying to dig into.
You nodded when I'd love to hear what
We'll
you're
have a
thinking.
session on subsidies.
Yeah, we have a
actually.
session on subsidies on Wednesday, and Lewis is on the panel, so he'll probably say the same things.
Wednesday morning.
Yeah, Wednesday morning. No, I mean, so in preparation for this panel, you know, I think one thing that has come up when we try to talk about subsidies is that, so there's two very different things. There's like, when you talk about subsidies and O&M, no donor or lender likes to hear that you are subsidizing O&M. That's kind of like, you know, where they're saying like, no, we'll give you subsidies for the initial access, for the building, for the infrastructure, and then, but the goal of giving you that money is that, you know, your tariffs should really cover all of the O&M. So that's, yeah, exactly. Government should take it over, or users should just pay the amount, and as we all know, that's not really possible. So, yeah, I mean, I think like there is a real question of like, and Akwaya's experience recently on research has been more on the like subsidizing that upfront infrastructure and the access. And on the O&M side, you know, honestly, it's almost a question that we need to look into, like, what are appropriate tariffs that are actually possible, and then kind of selling that to a finance person of, like, this is why this is the maximum tariff. So it needs to be a bit of a, like, story and narrative of, like, what is the gap between what people can pay, whether that is a willingness to pay a study, or that is, you know, you've done the math. This is what people can pay, this is how much O&M costs, here's the gap, and that's where the subsidy needs to exist. So when you're talking about targeting subsidies, I think it's more about, in O&M, it's about crafting that narrative really well for funders.
How does Uptime think about, this is not like short term, but like mid or long term of like aligning increased revenue for the cost of O&M you identify over time? Like, let's take the Zambia school model where, what, 440, like, what's it up, how much is it per year per school?
Well, it's less than $1 per student per year.
Okay. Let's just theoretically say $100 per year for O&M per school, but is Uptime doing anything on the revenue generation side through tariffing?
Yeah, so no, that's kind of the, it's in a school-based model, these are public schools, students aren't paying fees, there's no revenue being generated for the service from this, and so it's, that kind of for us has made it, I mean, in community service, we definitely are trying to incentivize revenue generation, users paying fees. But that leads to a lot of challenges when you're trying to scale this up, and we're doing that at a national scale. So in the schools-based model, it's kind of like the Ministry of Education recognizes this is squarely in their agreement to provide, or Ministry of Water, but like it's government responsibility to provide these services, no tariff funding coming in rural. Now in Zambia, in Lusaka, like schools do pay a water bill to the utility, but in rural areas they're not paying. Yeah, sometimes in rural areas they're not paying, and so that's kind of the trick to we've turned here, so to speak. It's like a shortcut because we're not trying to generate services.
I'd love to hear from this group, like what's your kind of role in this discussion and what perspectives do you bring?
Let me just clarification. You mentioned $48. Is it $48 per school?
$48 per school per year. In this single time, in
And who is paying the 48?
The school pays for that out of their operations and maintenance budget.
Yeah,
And it's
so.
able to get a job done.
It is, but where are you, like, where are you from? Yeah. So I think it's important to distinguish Calcutta schools. It's like they're small, they're vertically oriented, they're 200 to 400 students. All the infrastructure is largely indoors, or at least in like enclosed hallways. The amount of infrastructure is minimal in terms of crowd. So when we think of like Ethiopia, where you have a campus with 3,000 students that's outdoors with satellite buildings, that's a really, really big challenge. So I think we need to be thinking of also like the density of the schools and how they're oriented.
Or automatically for
Yeah.
Okay.
What I remember is that in Ghana, for the schools, if they get water from the utility, they have to pay. They have to pay. And I know some of the schools were struggling to pay and also to keep their toilets clean. And most of them were relying on the PTAs, Parent-Teacher Association. So through the Parent-Teacher Associations, parents are able to contribute something to get that done.
Which brought up an interesting, does Ghana now have a free education for all policy? Like, can schools raise money from parents? In Ghana?
That's tricky.
It's tricky. I can't remember where it is. Because that's becoming more and more of a challenge in Zambia.
We have, even at the high school, it's free education, so they don't want the parents to pay. Yet, they don't do what they have to do. So that is the thing for the
So what about, you brought up the point of utilities. We haven't talked very much about utilities. And if we are in an area that is utility fed, which might be less the case in rural settings, what do you all think about the role of the utility in providing O&M services or preventative maintenance, and how far should that go? Because one of the challenges we've seen is the utility, in theory, provides maintenance up to the point of connection to the campus, but anything after the campus wall, they're like, not us, that's Ministry of Education, like, but the utility has a footprint, has human resources, has a presence, knows the infrastructure, has the engineering expertise. So we're starting to consider the role of the utility as a service provider in the sense that in a similar way you use ECHO, like how does a utility like lose our water board? So I'm curious if you have experience with the utilities.
So we did some research we were working on a research project about water quality amongst water vendors. So these are the small scale providers in urban, low income, dense areas, basically households that are not connected to the pipe network. And I thought of that because it's a similar challenge where the utility will often bring the pipe network, to the edge of a community, and then a lot of other vendors will connect off of that, kiosks, etc. But the utility historically has always said our responsibility is up to the meter, nothing after that. In Kenya, the water board, essentially the regulator, the national regulator, came in 2019, passed new regulations, said actually now this is all your responsibility. So they said the utilities are responsible for overseeing the vendors in the entire country officially. Have utilities started acting on that? Because they're still trying to figure out what it means. It's a massive, like, in a place like Nairobi, you're talking about thousands of vendors. So, we're actually trying to work on a pilot right now in terms of coming up with a solution where, these vendors can be trained to basically do O&M themselves. But at the same time, you'll still need an actor who is doing the oversight, who is testing the water on a routine basis, and who is providing that like capacity development and building skill to these vendors in order for them to move this forward themselves. So, you know, I think I think the question comes down to like, what should the role of utility be in doing either of those, the oversight or the capacity building? And, you know, we don't have an answer yet, and I think financing is gonna be a part of that, has to be a part of that, so maybe the utility plays a role, but who's paying them to? And that's been their biggest question, is like, we're not gonna take on the responsibility of overseeing thousands of vendors when we have no additional money coming in. How are we gonna do that? So, yeah, you know, it could be, yeah, and so we're trying to, I mean, but then the vendors are operating on like the thinnest of margins in these areas anyway, so, you know, does that cost get passed on to the household, and then you have an affordability issue. So there will be a role for a subsidy here as well, it's just a question of who's paying.
And you're with who?
She's a choir. She's presenting on this work at SHRI.
Yeah.
Christine, I'm curious from your perspective, like the vision from this perspective, is there an interest in that O&M, like thinking about financing and the role of financing?
Yeah.
What?
I mean, it's really tied more to making, I would say, world vision systems sustainable. Because they're kind of handed off, I think, and then there's these community groups and supposed to be using them. And so we're looking at how to make that sustainable. And I think financing can actually be a tool to that. It's like you can access this things, but you have to be charging them, you have to be collecting, you have to be metering, all of these things to make that whole business viable. And so in some cases it's a community association, and in some cases it's actually a private utility that we're working on. Whichever can do it, I would say depending on the context.
Does Vision Fund have, does Vision Fund have like state twos, like utilities or responsibilities?
We have a few, but we're taking more of a systems approach, or I would say a second tier financial approach, where we would finance any financial institution that would work with us, and so we're getting local financial institutions to look into that sector. We have a different kind of role, it's not necessarily but in some cases, so Rwanda, we're trying financing directly to a local rural utility. Like you said, margins are so thin, it's like we be so careful not to damage the utility that we're lending to by over-indebting them. But then they're putting in household connections, which will make their work more profitable. So that I guess, you know, schools and all, if they don't pay what they need to, at least the households will be paying enough. So it's making that whole O&M system sustainable. And then people get household connections.
I have a question. When people think of O&M, do they also think of FSM, like people centered management, as part of that package, or think they're
Not in the rural.
like when we think of O&M for a school or for a healthcare facility, is that also part of what we're, or is that a separate, like a different problem? It is often different service providers, different problems, different systems, different regulators, but I'm just curious about the thoughts, like how does FSM and O&M?
Right, and the pricing of it too.
We have no experience.
I had this conversation with them, and what about septic fee? Hard no.
Not that it's not important, but yeah.
It is an interesting issue, particularly if you're thinking of like service providers to schools, how you surround them with like an ecosystem of like affordable service providers and the financial.
We've done some work on FTing in urban areas, and it's just the exact same questions that Lisa mentioned about subsidies. You know, people generally aren't willing to pay full price, so what's going to be subsidized, particularly for safe emptying services right now, right? So it's a lot cheaper just to get someone to empty unsafely and dump it right next to the house, but of course that's not safe. It's more expensive to transport it and treat it, so how
Yeah, and I think also it depends on the, like, how dense or not your context is, like, 'cause that's gonna contribute to the cost, yeah. Like rural, like, or transportation costs are gonna be different, or something like that.
Rural, you just pay, usually there's.
Yeah.
I would say.
One big takeaway that I was hoping people kind of got out of this session was, I think a lot of, for quite a while, a lot of the sessions on O&M were like janitorial in nature, like cleaning toilets and fixing leaks and replacing taps. But recognizing that there is this much larger kind of system of financial flows and service providers and utilities and that, you know, when we think of places that have solved this better, America might be regressing in this regard. Probably is regressing, but there's no way to track it anymore. But like, schools do have like maintenance people on staff, but they also are surrounded by like a vibrant ecosystem of like infrastructure providers. So how do we elevate this and kind of think more broadly? But it sounds like people have like a very good direction.
But there was never a bottom-up communication.
I have a question about your Ethiopian model. So this is, schools choose to sign individual contracts.
That's in Kolkata.
Yeah, yeah. And so, are they required to? I mean, like, regulation, or like, they could voluntarily choose not to, right? So what's, you know, do they all sort of understand the problem, and they're all like, yeah, 48, was it whatever it was, $48, I can do that, and so it's, you know, 100% silent rate, or is there something else going on that's driving them to
Yeah, so in the case of in Kolkata, like in the case of India, there are we're going on like a decade of national campaigns around the importance of water and sanitation. And with the Jal Javeen mission, also you have like a lot of emphasis on water, that's less in urban school settings, but there is like a broader kind of environment. But I will say, the biggest motivation is Splash has been working with these schools for like over 5 years already. They have received an entire suite of like wash infrastructure. Teachers don't have to worry about it like they used to, and it's like worth it for school leaders and administration to make that payment. They've been out of, like, they're done worrying about toilets and clean water and drinking stations and hand washing stations because it's all so proactively maintained. And so the feedback we've received is like, for a school administrator who's ultimately making the decision about school budget, they're like, if I can like hand off $48 and then I don't have to worry about X, Y, and Z, like, it's worth it. But I would have to come back to you in terms of like how robust or consistent the like accountability is. There is this similar school management, like that surrounds the school. Like, it's almost like a board of directors for the school. The school is operating right, and it's like parents, local government, they review the whole school performance across members of things, mostly educational. But if the school's not managed well, they have a mechanism to report the administration. But I don't think it's like very so more so it's like it's affordable, expensive, and it's like
So the question is, will they keep paying it, or
It's what?
will they keep paying it over time?
But it also seems pretty affordable.
it is affordable, and like we schools, that's entirely competitive. But it does in some cases require Splash to be there. We still have a very long footprint where we're going and there's like, we talk about subsidy, like quality of subsidy, like a project staff person coming and knocking on the door and saying like,
Toilets.
that's like part of it.
So now, because the maintenance contracts pay for they fully fund like 4 rotations. I can't remember the exact number, but they also fund like an outreach element. So those fees cover kind of when there's a new thing for somebody from SHRI, we have an annual maintenance contract with you. I want to make sure you're planning to renew it. Here's what it gets you. And if the school doesn't buy the preventative maintenance contract, there's like a $15 a year ad hoc like repair contract where they like it's lower annual cost, but it still provides like ad hoc repair.
So in the case of the good. So you want to speaking of organization real quick, quick report out. So you want to go back together?
Yeah, so what we want to do, and I said this last group, so duplicative for you, sorry, is the goal is to kind of gather a whole bunch of themes. I don't think we're gonna like solve the problem in any sense, but we do want to send out kind of a consolidated, like tactical documents. Like if you're wrestling with O&M, here are the things to think about, like working on existing budget lines, aligning budgets, in terms of where payments can be made, who are the human resources on site. We're kind of basically like, here's some things to think about as you wrestle with them. So we're going to rally around the board in a little bit and kind of come up with like what are the themes that we are seeing. So I welcome your participation.
Oh no, I wasn't.
I'm starting to do some of that here, but we're also going to rally around. Right, Gracie?
We can do this wall as well. If you've already got yours organized.
I don't know if they're organized yet. Well, let's go over here. Okay. But we're bringing like all 3 groups together.
Yes, we are attempting to bring them back.
Okay. So we're going to rally around.
I had a bunch of little stations.
Yes.
Hello. We're gonna do a very, very quick, short, abbreviated report out, the three of us, just to give you a chance. I know we only did 2 breakout groups. It's hard to end conversations when they're going so well. So I think we're each just going to say a couple things that came up, a couple themes that came up in our groups. So I can say, at least from the proving perspective, I think something that came up often were these supply chain issues. When you're starting a new system and when you want to have parts in place so that you can respond quickly and limit the downtime of facilities, having those parts in place is really important, but also really difficult. And then we also talked a good amount about accountability mechanisms, especially financial accountability mechanisms. How do we decide, for the context that we're working in, what's the right size of disincentive before we're going to lose buy-in from our, especially private partners that might be doing service delivery for us, versus what is enough incentive to keep them excited about delivering this service? What is the right amount of profit margin? How do we get accurate bids for these kinds of services? If you have answers for those things, talk to your neighbors. We didn't have answers, but we had a lot of questions. Anvesh, are you ready?
I can go.
Chris, you're great.
Yeah. Thank you all for participating over on this side with us at Splash. A few themes that really came up was the aligning of kind of financial flows. So understanding where the money is going to come from, how it's going to be dispersed, who disperses it to whom, on what time scale, and really being careful to try to align that with the relevant service providers and actors is a big challenge, but some expertise in the room that have been trying to do that. Repeatedly hearing some of the challenges of WASH in schools, which is particularly what I'm familiar with and talking about, but the fact that it's cross-ministerial, so it requires a lot of collaboration and consensus building and cross-ministerial engagement, which makes accountability challenging, and it diffuses that accountability. So understanding what accountability mechanisms actually exist. We talked about kind of different school management committees, but also the role of an EMAS and things like that. And then a few other things that really came up is who does this at scale in a city. We talked about the role of a utility or water vendors. Does their service extend beyond the wall of the school or the meter? They are a natural service provider, that does make sense, but also the importance of like a vibrant private sector that can be leveraged and tapped into in a way that makes sense. Last one I think that came up was in thinking about who really kind of aligning, I already mentioned the aligning of incentives, but really bringing in the financial flows with the incentives for performance, and sometimes those sit in different areas. If the Ministry of Water is ultimately responding, like required to provide water to the school, but the Ministry of Education is the one to provide facilities, that makes accountability challenging. So that kind of brings together the accountability and the cross-ministerial aspect. There was a lot more. I'm happy to talk more after this. I'm not sure too.
Yeah. So I feel like some of the themes are quite similar, so I'm just going to breeze past through this. But I feel like I heard, let me go from the RIA standpoint view, but like the first thing I heard was like funding is the biggest issue, and then we were talking about, again, financial flows, and it was interesting to hear of different models that people were talking about that sort of works based on the context. We also spoke about technical assistance and how much of a role does training professional service providers works, and how important it is to actually have that, to have a formalized, well-functioning system. And again, in terms of accountability, I kept asking this question, who does this? And like we went into a back and forth discussion about whether this has to be something that's privately owned, whether this is publicly owned, whether it's a mix of both. And we heard a good bit about how the funders, service providers, and regulators need not be the same entity, but it has to be distributed. And to what level does the government have to be involved, since this is a public service? So there's again, a lot more that we discussed in terms of the accountability and how this might function, but I'm happy to talk more about this as well.
And Anvesh has very bravely offered to put together a bit of a summary from this session. So if you'd like to receive that summary, give him your email somehow. We will send that out, summarize what we talked about today.
Sorry, if you haven't typed out your email in this, just come by and I'll type it down. I'm sorry it kept on switching to Hindi. I don't know why it did that. I didn't realize that. I'm so sorry.
It's your fault if you can't type Hindi. But thank you so much for coming today. That's all we've got. But thanks for the lively discussion.
Thank you for everybody's participation.
Thank you.
Yes.
No, I know that you're also.
So like, you all touch with me.
We were just starting the ID, like the Ethiopia. Well, it used to be like we didn't have a location yet. So and then Ethiopia was supposed to be in the Sahara region. That was where we did like the whole RTC design and then it fell apart. Definitely, we were definitely not as market as some of our peers because we had maybe like less than 10% of our we just we were actually because of like all of us like it's like a generally good experience to feel like one of those like box type of M&E exercises. It was very much in focus on it, so let's do more of it and then that's like a little bit of more resources. So now building out right now because I think my had building the and evaluators, so that's really
I just arrived. I'm the moderator. Okay. I saw something about swapping the laptop. Is this one here or no? We can't swap the laptops. No, I saw a message in some room. There's a problem. Let's get it. Oh, it's about sunflower. Yeah. I make a mess of the flower. No, you're fine. I still don't know who's going to look at the chair there.
right now we test out some